I never imagined Thanksgiving could become the day I felt the most invisible in my life. I walked into my son's house, expecting family, warmth, and gratitude, but instead, he seated me at table 12, labeled simply as guest. I could feel the shock on my face, the heat rising in my chest. My heart sank as laughter and awkward glances followed me. At that moment, I knew something had to change. You will not believe what I did next and how he never saw it coming. By the end, he would regret every cruel word and action he had ever done. My name is Richard, and I am 58 years old. I have spent my life building a family, raising my children, and doing everything I could to provide them with comfort, love, and guidance. I always believed that loyalty and effort were reciprocated, that years of sacrifice would earn respect and gratitude. I was wrong. That Thanksgiving, I realized just how fragile respect can be when it is ignored, dismissed, or treated as an afterthought. My son Daniel is 32. From the outside, he seems successful, confident, and charming. He has always had a magnetic personality that draws people in. But underneath that charm is arrogance, entitlement, and a disturbing lack of empathy. I had watched him grow from a mischievous boy into a man who thought he was untouchable, who believed that the world owed him obedience and admiration. It was one of the cruelest transformations I have ever witnessed in a human being, and it was the very quality that would make what happened at Thanksgiving so painful. The morning of Thanksgiving was crisp and bright. I woke early, anticipating a warm family gathering. I imagined the laughter, the stories, and the smells of roasted turkey, buttery mashed potatoes, and fresh cranberry sauce. My wife had passed a few years earlier, so this dinner was especially important to me. I wanted to feel connected, to see my family together, and to share in moments that reminded me why I had devoted my life to raising them. I was looking forward to hugging my children, watching them smile, and feeling the familiar warmth of family love. When I arrived at Daniel's house, I noticed immediately that everything was immaculate. The driveway was swept clean, and the scent of autumn leaves mixed with the aroma of home-cooked meals wafted through the air. Inside, the house gleamed. Candles flickered on the dining table, and the silverware reflected the soft light, polished to perfection. Everything seemed to signal care, thoughtfulness, and hospitality. I had expected to be greeted at the head of the table, the position I had always occupied at family gatherings. I had assumed my presence would be celebrated, my years of effort and love acknowledged. Instead, Daniel looked at me with an expression that I still cannot describe without shivering. He smiled, but it was not a smile of warmth or welcome. It was a calculated, almost cruel grin. He directed me toward a corner of the room where a small, unassuming table sat, tucked away from the main family gathering. There, in front of me, was a placard with my name on it. Beneath my name was a single word that cut through me like ice. Guest. I froze, my hands felt heavy, my heart pounded in my chest, and my throat constricted. Around me, the room hummed with conversation, laughter, and the clinking of silverware. I could feel the eyes of other family members flicking toward me, some with surprise, some with barely concealed amusement. I sat down, every nerve in my body screaming, and tried to maintain composure, but every second was torture. Every glance, every whisper, felt like a blade cutting into my dignity. I tried to understand what I had done wrong. Had I made a mistake in raising him? Was this some misguided attempt at humor? Nothing made sense. I felt a profound sense of betrayal, not only from Daniel, but from the family that allowed this to happen without intervention. The injustice was so palpable, so deliberate, that it overwhelmed me. I realized then that this was not a casual slight. Daniel had gone out of his way to humiliate me in my own home, in front of those who should have been allies, those who should have defended me. At that moment, I felt smaller than I ever had in my life. My love, my years of sacrifice, my support, everything seemed invisible, meaningless. And I knew that if I did nothing, this act of disrespect would define not only this Thanksgiving, but the relationship I had with my son and possibly the rest of my life. I could not allow this to stand. As I sat there at table 12, pretending to eat while my heart burned with humiliation, I knew that this was the moment everything changed. He had underestimated me, and he would soon learn just how serious I could be when my dignity is on the line. If you have ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, hit that like button and subscribe. This story is about humiliation, heartbreak, and the sweetest kind of justice. Stay with me, because the moment of revenge will leave you speechless. The days after that Thanksgiving were some of the most difficult I have ever endured. Every time I thought about Daniel's deliberate humiliation, I felt the heat of anger rise in my chest, a relentless pressure that made it hard to focus, hard to sleep, hard to breathe. I replayed the image of that small, lonely table, the placard with the word guest, and the smirk on his face. It haunted me in every quiet moment. I could not believe that the person I had raised, the person I had devoted my life to, could be so cruel, so calculated. I tried to reach out to him, to speak about it calmly, hoping that perhaps this had been a misunderstanding. I called him once, my voice steady but firm, and asked why he had done what he did. He laughed. The sound was hollow, almost cruel, and he told me to stop overreacting. He said it was just a joke, that I was being too sensitive. His words hit me harder than the initial act. He had not only humiliated me, but now he dismissed my pain, mocking it, belittling it. Every syllable he uttered was a reminder of his arrogance, of the gulf that had grown between us. I watched him carefully in the weeks that followed, noticing the way he interacted with others, the subtle arrogance in his gestures, the condescending tone he used when speaking to anyone he perceived as beneath him. It was infuriating to witness. I felt trapped in a situation where I could do nothing immediate, forced to endure his disrespect in silence while my pride and self-respect burned quietly but fiercely inside me. Family gatherings became unbearable. Even casual conversations were laced with tension. I felt the eyes of relatives on me, sensing my discomfort, and some offered awkward apologies that could not mend the humiliation I had suffered. Daniel seemed to enjoy the power imbalance, glancing at me with amusement whenever he could. The situation escalated from mere discomfort to a full psychological assault. Every meeting, every interaction became a battlefield where I felt small, invisible, and wronged in a way that demanded acknowledgement. The injustice was not just emotional, it was strategic. Daniel had chosen this moment, this method, to assert dominance over me. I realized that he had thought he could control not just my presence, but my feelings, my pride, my identity as his father. That realization ignited something in me I had never felt before, a burning, calculated desire for justice. This was no longer about hurt feelings. This was about restoring the balance of respect and making it clear that deliberate humiliation, no matter who it comes from, has consequences. I began keeping detailed notes, documenting every interaction, every insult, every dismissive glance or comment. I wrote down the dates, the locations, even the exact wording of conversations. My mind became a careful observer, cataloging evidence with precision. I started researching legal options, thinking about how I could confront Daniel in a way that was undeniable, strategic, and effective. Every plan I imagined brought a mixture of adrenaline and relief. The thought of finally holding him accountable made the tension in my chest almost bearable. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the world outside seemed still, I would replay every moment, every humiliation, in vivid detail. I could hear the laughter of others, feel the chill of the polished wooden floor beneath my chair, sense the flicker of candlelight reflecting off his smug expression. I imagined confronting him in a courtroom, the power dynamics reversed, the tables turned. The idea of justice, carefully measured and inevitable, began to occupy my thoughts constantly. I knew that acting impulsively would accomplish nothing. I needed a plan that would be precise, undeniable, and devastating in its effectiveness. I began to see the situation as a chessboard, with every move calculated, every step building toward a final, irreversible payoff. By the time I reached the end of that mental rehearsal, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Daniel would regret underestimating his father, and he would never treat me as a guest again. The breaking point came on a quiet Sunday evening, when the house felt heavier than usual, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and forces your thoughts to speak louder. I was sitting in my living room, surrounded by photographs of a life I had built, birthday parties, graduation days, Christmas mornings. Daniel standing beside me, smiling, arms around my shoulders, looking proud to be my son. I stared at those images until my chest tightened and my vision blurred. That was the moment I realized something painful and undeniable. The man in those photos no longer existed. The son I knew had been replaced by someone who saw me as disposable. I stood up so abruptly that the chair scraped against the floor. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from clarity. A dangerous kind of calm settled over me, the kind that comes right before a storm breaks. I was done trying to understand his behavior. I was done searching for excuses that would soften his cruelty. I was done hoping for an apology that would never come. Something inside me hardened. I walked to my desk and opened the notebook I had started using to record every interaction with him. Page after page filled with dates, words, and memories. It was not anger anymore. It was structure. It was control. I realized that this was no longer about emotion. This was about accountability. If Daniel believed that humiliating me carried no consequences, then I would show him how wrong he was. And that thought sent a cold rush through my body. I remembered the way he laughed when I confronted him, the dismissive shrug, the casual way he brushed off my pain as if it were entertainment. That was when it became clear. He did not see me as his father anymore. He saw me as weak, as something he could step on without resistance. That was his mistake. I began researching quietly. Laws regarding emotional distress, civil liability, public humiliation. I learned the language of justice. Every legal phrase felt like a weapon sharpening in my hands. I was not looking for revenge driven by rage. I was building something stronger, something irreversible. And with every sentence I read, I felt my power returning. Late at night, I imagined the courtroom, the way his confidence would falter, the way his voice would tighten when he realized he could not laugh his way out of this. That image became fuel, not violent, not chaotic, controlled, surgical. He had humiliated me in front of our family. I would humble him in front of the law. That realization sent a shiver through me, not fear, anticipation. I began organizing everything. Photographs of the table, messages exchanged after Thanksgiving, statements from relatives who admitted they found it uncomfortable but were afraid to speak. Every detail became part of a growing structure that felt stronger than any argument I could have spoken out loud. This was no longer emotional. This was calculated. One evening, as I placed the final document into a folder, I paused and stared at it. The weight of it surprised me. Not physically, but psychologically. This folder represented dignity. It represented restoration. It represented the moment. I stopped being a victim and started becoming something far more dangerous to him, unignorable. I realized that he believed family meant immunity. That blood excused cruelty. That arrogance was untouchable when it came from confidence. He was about to learn that respect does not disappear just because someone decides to ignore it. And then another thought surfaced, sharper than all the rest. He had taught others how to treat me by how he treated me. I would teach him how consequences work. My pulse slowed. My breathing steadied. This was no longer emotional chaos. This was purpose. I was no longer reacting. I was preparing. The strategy was simple. I would let the law speak where emotion failed. I would force him into a position where he could not joke, deflect, or dominate, where every word would be recorded, where arrogance would crumble under structure, where his power would evaporate in silence. I was no longer his father, begging for respect. I was his opponent, demanding accountability. And the moment I accepted that, something inside me shifted permanently. The man who sat at table 12 as a guest no longer existed. The man preparing his response had arrived. I moved carefully, quietly. Every step had to be precise. I started by organizing my evidence into sections, each one telling a story that words alone never could. Photos of the seating arrangement, screenshots of messages, written statements from relatives who admitted, in hushed tones, that what Daniel did felt deliberate and cruel. I laid everything out across my dining table like a battlefield map. Papers overlapping, edges aligned, my hands steady, my breathing controlled. This was no longer about anger. This was architecture. The first call I made was to an attorney who specialized in civil disputes. His voice was calm, professional, unshaken. I described everything without emotion, just facts. The humiliation, the placement, the label, the dismissal afterward. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Not doubt, consideration. He finally said, "This is not small. This is intentional emotional harm." That sentence felt like a door unlocking. I scheduled a consultation. When I walked into his office, the air smelled faintly of leather and paper. The quiet hum of fluorescent lights filled the room. He flipped through my documents slowly, deliberately. I watched his eyebrows tighten as he read. I watched his jaw shift. He looked up at me and said, "You are not overreacting." That was the moment I knew this would work. I did not rush. Rushing creates mistakes. I built the case layer by layer. I requested witness affidavits. Some family members hesitated. Fear does that to people. I did not push. I waited. And slowly the truth pulled them in. One aunt whispered, "It was wrong." "I just did not know what to say," I replied. "Now you do." That silence that followed was heavy and powerful. Each signature felt like weight being added to the scale of justice. The paperwork grew thicker, the structure stronger, my confidence sharper. And Daniel knew nothing. That was the most satisfying part. I imagined him living his life, joking, laughing, believing he had one, believing that humiliation fades with time, believing that fathers absorb disrespect quietly. He had no idea a storm was forming beneath the surface of his comfort. The day the lawsuit was filed, my heart beat slower than I expected. Not from fear, from control. The courthouse smelled of polished stone and old paper. The echo of footsteps bounced through the hall like distant thunder. I signed the final form. My pen moved with certainty. Once, twice, done. There was no dramatic speech, no emotional collapse, just the quiet understanding that something irreversible had begun. 3 days later, my phone rang. His name on the screen. I did not answer. It rang again. I let it ring. Then a message came through. "What is this nonsense?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. He called again. I answered, "You sued me." His voice cracked, disbelief trying to disguise panic. "I filed for accountability," I said. "You are being dramatic." "No, I am being precise." Silence followed, not confusion, fear. He tried anger next. "You cannot do this to your own son," I replied calmly. "You already did it to your father." That sentence ended the conversation. The courtroom process was slow, methodical, beautiful in its structure. Every document presented was a mirror. Every argument exposed his arrogance. Every denial made him look smaller. I watched him sit straighter at first, confident, then quieter, then restless. His leg bounced, his jaw tightened, his eyes avoided mine. That was not coincidence, that was pressure. When witnesses spoke, their voices shook at first, then steadied. Truth does that. One relative said it felt like he wanted to embarrass him. Another added, it was not a joke. It was deliberate. Daniel stared at the table. I felt nothing. No guilt, no hesitation, only balance being restored. When his attorney whispered to him, his shoulders slumped. The power he relied on was dissolving in real time. He looked at me once, not with anger, with something closer to realization. I held his gaze unblinking. He finally understood that I was not asking for respect. I was enforcing it. The courtroom was silent, almost unbearably so. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. Every seat was filled with observers, lawyers shuffling papers, the faint click of heels against tile echoing in the distance. Daniel sat across from me, trying to maintain his usual smirk, but it faltered when he realized that every eye in the room was on him. I felt a strange calm wash over me. This was it. This was the moment where the balance would shift. The judge cleared his throat, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Daniel's attorney made one last attempt at dismissal. His words fast, defensive, nervous. "Your Honor, this is absurd. This is a private family dispute blown entirely out of proportion. There is no precedent." The judge raised a hand. Silence. Perfect, heavy silence. When the verdict was read, Daniel's confident posture crumpled. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Richard Thompson, awarding damages of $340,000 and acknowledgement of intentional emotional distress. A pause. The words hung in the air like a tangible weight. Daniel's eyes widened, his mouth opened slightly, then closed again. The arrogance that had shielded him for years evaporated in a single sentence. I could feel my own chest rise and fall, slower now, steadier. The tension that had lodged itself in my shoulders and tightened my stomach for weeks finally began to loosen. Relief, triumph, validation, every moment of humiliation he had caused me, every whispered laugh, every glance of dismissal, every cruel smirk reflected back in the cold, undeniable logic of justice. Daniel swallowed hard. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I could hear the faint click of his shoe against the floor. He tried to mask panic with irritation. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, but the sound carried no weight. It was hollow. I stood. My body felt lighter than it had in months. The courtroom lights reflected off the polished wood, catching in my eyes. I looked directly at him. No rage, no pleading. Only the steady gaze of someone who had waited, who had planned, who had endured, and who had finally been recognized. The judge's gavel struck. Bam. The sound resonated through the room like thunder, sealing the moment in a way no argument could ever undo. Daniel's attorney murmured under his breath, defeated. The spectators exchanged whispers, glances of disbelief at the swift and complete reversal of power. I walked slowly from the courtroom, each step deliberate, each one a silent declaration of victory. The smell of polished wood and faint coffee lingered, grounding me in the reality of what had been accomplished. Relief washed over me again, and I allowed myself a small, private smile. Outside, the crisp air felt sharper, cleaner. I inhaled deeply, tasting the cool freedom that comes from being acknowledged, validated, and respected. I had endured humiliation. I had been ignored, and I had been dismissed, but none of that mattered anymore. Justice had arrived, and it was precise, measured, and undeniable. I saw Daniel lingering near the courthouse steps, his face pale, his expression unreadable. For the first time in years, he was uncertain, powerless. He had believed he could control perception, manipulate feelings, and erase respect with a simple joke and a label. He had been wrong. I did not gloat. I did not laugh. I simply felt the satisfaction of balance restored. Every ounce of humiliation he had inflicted on me was now mirrored in the acknowledgement he could not avoid. My chest loosened, my shoulders dropped. My body exhaled all the tension it had carried for months. I realized something then. This was not just about money. It was about dignity. It was about proving to myself and to him that deliberate cruelty has consequences, even from someone as close as a child. As I stepped into the sunlight outside, the warmth on my skin felt like renewal. I had waited patiently, endured quietly, and executed a plan that required precision, restraint, and patience. And now, the weight that had been pressing on me lifted entirely. Daniel would never forget this day, either would I. And in that moment, I finally felt whole again. Looking back on everything, I understand now that life has a way of teaching lessons in the most unexpected, sometimes brutal ways. I never sought revenge for the thrill of it. I did it because injustice cannot go unanswered, especially when it comes from someone you have loved and trusted. Karma has a way of catching up, but sometimes it takes deliberate action to ensure that the lesson lands. Daniel's arrogance, his belief that family loyalty could shield him from consequences, cost him more than he ever imagined. He learned that cruelty carries weight, that humiliation, when administered intentionally, does not vanish. I have thought a lot about what this experience taught me. One lesson is about patience. So often, people let emotion dictate action. I could have confronted him with rage, screamed, or publicly embarrassed him in retaliation. That would have been satisfying in the moment, but hollow in the long run. Planning, preparation, and careful execution created a victory that was both tangible and permanent. It was a lesson in the power of strategy over impulse. Another lesson is about boundaries. Respect is not optional, even with family. I realized that love and support do not obligate someone to tolerate disrespect. Letting humiliation slide once only invites more. Standing up for myself was not selfish, it was necessary. It reclaimed something that had been stolen from me, my dignity. There is a strange clarity that comes after the storm. I am no longer weighed down by anger or resentment, but neither do I feel forgiveness. Forgiveness would diminish the significance of the injustice. It would allow him to minimize what he did and pretend it did not matter. I will never forget the cold smirk when he seated me at table 12, nor will I ever forget the validation of the courtroom, the moment justice was undeniable. That memory is a permanent reminder of accountability. I have also realized that personal growth often comes through struggle. Enduring the humiliation, the doubts, the fear of confronting family dynamics forced me to examine my own strength. I discovered reserves of patience, resilience, and clarity I did not know I possessed. The process transformed me not into someone who seeks revenge for pleasure, but into someone who does not allow injustice to stand, who takes control when others try to diminish him, and life moves forward. I am no longer the man who walked into that dining room hoping to be welcomed, and instead found himself labeled a guest. I am someone who has faced betrayal, endured it, and emerged stronger. The pain I carried for weeks has been replaced by quiet confidence. My dignity is restored. My voice has weight. My presence is recognized. For Daniel, this experience will linger. He may try to rationalize it to forget it, but the truth is permanent. He learned that deliberate humiliation has consequences. And I learned that standing firm, planning carefully, and holding others accountable is not cruelty, is justice. Life is too short to tolerate disrespect, and sometimes the sweetest satisfaction comes from ensuring the consequences match the crime. I do not feel anger now. I feel power, control, and the quiet knowledge that I did not allow myself to be a victim. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button. Tell us in the comments your most satisfying revenge story, and subscribe for more gripping tales like this. Reflect on your own life. Have you ever endured humiliation that demanded a response? What would you do if someone treated you as I was treated?